Before the pyramids, before written history, before humanity even learned to farm, a war was raging across the galaxy. On one side, the Arcturians, beings of pure light, masters of consciousness and harmony. On the other, the Draconians, a ruthless reptilian empire built on conquest and control. This wasn't a war for territory, it was a war for the soul of the cosmos itself, and the echoes of this ancient conflict are buried deep in your DNA, reflected in every myth of angels and demons, and playing out in the spiritual battles of your own life. This is the true story of the war that shaped our galaxy and our species. In the vast silence between stars lies the memory of wars long forgotten by humankind, but not by the cosmos itself. The story of the Arcturians and Draconians is not merely one of two civilizations clashing for dominance. It is the embodiment of a cosmic struggle, an eternal dance between light and shadow, wisdom and control, compassion and conquest. Long before Earth's rise into awareness, long before humanity even questioned whether it was alone, the galaxy bore witness to one of the most defining conflicts in interstellar history. This was the Arcturian-Draconian War, an epic that spanned millennia, etched into the fabric of countless worlds, whispered in the myths of ancient civilizations, and lingering still in the collective subconscious of mankind. The Arcturians, beings of immense wisdom and spiritual refinement, hailed from the star system Arcturus, one of the brightest jewels in the constellation of Botas. To them, technology was never divorced from spirit. Their ships pulsed with crystalline energies resonating with consciousness itself. They were healers, architects of harmony, guardians not merely of worlds but of balance. To the Arcturians, war was not a preference, but they knew well the burden of defense, the responsibility of ensuring that younger civilizations were not crushed before they could find their own path to the stars. Standing against them were the Draconians, a reptilian empire birthed in shadows, whose homeworlds thrived on conquest. Hierarchical, ruthless, and mercilessly efficient, the Draconian Imperium stretched like a vast net across the galaxy, its tendrils seeking control over trade, resources, and genetic dominance. Their philosophy was stark: strength justifies rule. Where the Arcturians sought upliftment, the Draconians sought subjugation. Where one side nurtured, the other exploited. It was inevitable that their paths would collide. But the war was never simply about territory. It was about influence over the destiny of countless developing worlds. Earth was one such theater. Though humanity remained unaware, its myths, symbols, and religions were seeded with echoes of this ancient struggle. To understand this war is to peel back the layers of forgotten history, to glimpse the unseen forces that shaped not only galactic politics, but also the very psyche of emerging species. The conflict did not begin with a single battle. Rather, it grew from centuries of tension, skirmishes in border systems, silent contests of ideology. The Arcturians viewed themselves as stewards, offering guidance when asked, nurturing free will and collective growth. The Draconians saw that restraint as weakness. To them, worlds unclaimed were opportunities wasted. Planets brimming with life were resources to be harvested, their inhabitants conscripted into servitude, their genetic codes manipulated to serve the Empire's insatiable appetite for control. When two such forces lock eyes across the abyss of space, neutrality is short-lived. What began as whispers in the councils of distant stars soon escalated into one of the most far-reaching wars the galaxy had ever seen. It was not fought solely with ships of steel and beams of fire, though those would come, but with minds, with energies that transcended the physical. For both the Arcturians and Draconians had long since moved beyond primitive weaponry. Theirs was warfare of vibration, of frequency, of bending reality itself through technology and consciousness alike. The war was brutal, not because of the weapons, but because of what was at stake: the spiritual direction of the galaxy. If the Draconians prevailed, countless worlds would fall into chains, their evolution stunted, their spirit dimmed. If the Arcturians triumphed, freedom and harmony might endure, giving civilizations the chance to rise toward higher states of being. And so the stage was set. On one side, the gleaming fleets of Arcturian light, vessels shaped like living organisms, their cores humming with crystalline intelligence. On the other, the dark armadas of the Draconians, vast angular behemoths that blotted out starlight, their hulls laced with biological integration of scaled commanders who guided their ships like extensions of their will. The first sparks of war would ignite not in grand declarations, but in quiet systems far from the center of galactic maps. Unassuming planets, rich in energy veins or hidden portals, would become battlegrounds. Entire civilizations would be caught in the crossfire, some destroyed, others awakened to truths beyond their comprehension. And through it all, the Arcturians and Draconians waged not just war for power, but for the very soul of existence itself. This was no ordinary war. It was a war that reached into the collective subconscious of every being that ever gazed at the stars and wondered what lay beyond. Humanity, though young, carries fragments of this struggle in myth and memory. The dragons of old tales, the shining gods of the heavens, the eternal battle of good and evil. These were not inventions, but distant recollections, echoes of the war fought light years away, yet imprinted on the DNA of Earth's earliest ancestors. In the chapters that follow, we will journey into this conflict, into the minds of Arcturian seers who foresaw darkness rising, into the halls of Draconian war councils where conquests were mapped across starlit charts, into the vast interstellar arenas where battles unfolded in silence, unseen yet deeply felt. We will see alliances forged and betrayed, empires tested and reshaped, and the eternal question asked again and again: does might make right, or does true power lie in wisdom and restraint? This is the story of the Arcturian-Draconian War, a story not of one battle or one generation, but of an epic that spanned ages, and whose ripples are still felt today on Earth and beyond. Origins of the Arcturians. To understand the war, we must first understand those who fought it. Who were the Arcturians, these beings of light, spoken of in whispers across the cosmos? The Arcturians were not conquerors, nor were they empire builders. They were stewards, caretakers of balance, watchmen at the crossroads of destiny. Their home star, Arcturus, shines brightly just 36 light years from Earth, but to them distance and time were never barriers. Their civilization had risen long before humanity took its first steps. While our ancestors painted crude symbols on cave walls, the Arcturians were already traveling between stars, mapping energetic pathways through the galaxy, and weaving connections between worlds like threads in a cosmic tapestry. What set them apart was not simply their technology, though it was extraordinary. Their true strength lay in their consciousness. For the Arcturians, mind and spirit were not abstractions, but tangible forces. They had learned over countless millennia to harness the frequencies of thought, emotion, and intention. Their ships did not run on crude fuels or raw metals alone. They were crystalline constructs, alive with resonance, responding as much to the pilot's heart as to their commands. To step aboard an Arcturian vessel was to enter a symphony of light and sound, where walls shimmered with holographic constellations and corridors hummed softly like the inside of a living being. Their society reflected this harmony. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of the Draconians, the Arcturians built their civilization on collective wisdom. Councils of elders guided their star nation, not through domination, but through consensus and vision. Each Arcturian was trained from early development to align body, mind, and spirit, to see themselves not as individuals isolated from the whole, but as notes in a grand universal chord. Their art, their science, their governance, all of it was directed toward maintaining balance, fostering growth, and nurturing the potential of younger civilizations. And yet, they were no strangers to hardship. Their history told of cycles of rise and fall, moments when their own misuse of technology had nearly destroyed them. From those scars, they learned humility. They understood that wisdom comes not from power alone, but from restraint, from the willingness to let others stumble and rise on their own path. This philosophy became the heart of their role in the galaxy. Guardians, yes, but never tyrants. They offered guidance when asked, protection when needed. But they did not impose their will. The Arcturians were master builders, not of cities, but of gateways. Hidden across the galaxy were portals, energetic nexuses linking distant star systems. Many of these passages predated even the Arcturians, relics of civilizations older still. But the Arcturians had perfected the knowledge of how to use them safely, how to anchor them, how to prevent the collapse of entire systems under the strain of their use. In times of peace, they served as custodians of these networks, ensuring that the lifelines of interstellar travel remained open. In times of war, these gateways became lifelines and strategic prizes, the arteries through which fleets would flow. Perhaps their most profound gift, however, was their mastery of healing. To an Arcturian, disease was not simply biological, but energetic. They understood the deep interplay of mind, spirit, and body, and their healers could mend wounds not only of flesh, but of psyche. Their presence alone radiated calm, a vibration that soothed fear and despair. In the midst of war, they became sanctuaries, their ships carrying not just weapons, but vast chambers of light where the wounded of countless species could be restored. Legends speak of the Arcturian temples, structures of luminous crystal rising from the plains of their home world, resonating with frequencies that aligned entire populations into harmony. Visitors to these temples described visions, awakenings, transformations that changed the course of their lives. To stand in an Arcturian temple was to stand in the presence of the galaxy's memory itself. But such power, such wisdom, did not go unnoticed. For the Draconians, who measured worth in conquest, the Arcturians represented both a threat and a challenge. They were everything the Draconian hierarchy despised: cooperative rather than authoritarian, compassionate rather than ruthless, guardians rather than predators. The very existence of the Arcturians undermined the Draconian creed. How could fear and dominance justify themselves when another civilization thrived through harmony and trust? And so the Arcturians became targets, not because they sought war, but because their way of life was intolerable to those who built empires on control. The Draconians did not merely wish to defeat the Arcturians, they wished to break them, to prove that compassion was weakness, that harmony was fragility, that the galaxy could belong only to the strong. But the Arcturians were not weak. They were patient, deliberate, but when roused to defense, they became formidable beyond measure. Their fleets were not the largest, nor their weapons the most destructive, but their ships could phase through dimensions, appearing and vanishing in moments. Their weapons were designed not to obliterate, but to disable, to disarm, to neutralize. They fought not to conquer, but to protect, and that made them unpredictable to their enemies. Even more, they understood the battlefield of consciousness. Arcturian warriors trained in resonance combat, the ability to project frequencies that could disrupt hostile thought, confuse enemy pilots, or break the cohesion of Draconian squads. Battles were often fought as much in the silence of the mind as in the blaze of weapon fire. To face an Arcturian was to feel one's certainty unravel, to feel fear transmuted into reflection, aggression into hesitation. For many younger civilizations, the Arcturians became myths. They were remembered as gods, angels, beings of light who descended from the heavens to teach, to heal, to defend. Ancient Earth cultures, too, carried these echoes. Luminous beings in flowing forms, eyes filled with starlight, bringing knowledge from the skies. They never sought worship, but the impressions they left endured across millennia. And so, when the war with the Draconians began to escalate, the galaxy looked to Arcturus not as a fortress, but as a beacon. In their light, countless worlds found hope. In their wisdom, countless leaders found counsel. And in their resolve, the Draconians found something they had not anticipated, an enemy they could not easily break. The Arcturians had learned one truth that would guide them through the darkest hours of war, that the greatest power in the galaxy was not the ability to dominate, but the ability to endure. The homeworld of light. The Arcturians' homeworld orbited the brilliant star Arcturus, glowing amber in the constellation Bodas. Unlike Earth, where survival often demanded struggle against a harsh environment, the Arcturian world seemed designed for flourishing. Vast crystalline mountains stretched skyward, refracting starlight into rainbows that danced across emerald valleys. Oceans shimmered with bioluminescent life, their waves glowing softly at night, as if stars themselves had fallen into the waters. The skies were alive with auroras, not random bursts of radiation, but carefully tuned by planetary grids, harmonized with the consciousness of the planet itself. For the Arcturians, the planet was not a resource to be exploited, but a living partner. They believed their world had a consciousness, a guiding presence, and they structured their society around listening to it. Before major decisions, whether to build, to explore, or even to intervene in galactic affairs, councils would align with planetary energy, meditating in temples that amplified the planet's resonance. In this way, they ensured that their actions remained in harmony with both their world and the wider cosmos. A day in the life. Daily life for an Arcturian was nothing like the rigid labor of Draconian subjects or even the survival-driven existence of early human societies. Their lives were cycles of learning, creating, healing, and serving the whole. Children were not schooled in rote memorization, but in resonance training, taught to understand the vibrations of sound, light, and thought. By adolescence, an Arcturian youth could align their frequency with crystalline instruments, projecting images or music that could shift the emotions of entire rooms. Art was not entertainment, it was a form of science. Music could heal, sculpture could realign energy fields, and painting could anchor visions of futures yet to unfold. Every citizen was both an artist and a scientist, for the two were indistinguishable in a society where creativity was the highest expression of knowledge. Communities were built in spirals, cities designed not in grids, but in flowing curves that mirrored galactic geometry. Homes pulsed with gentle light, not from electrical currents, but from living crystals that responded to thought and intention. When an Arcturian entered their home, the walls shifted hue to reflect their mood, calming blues in times of stress, radiant gold in moments of joy. Spiritual practices. Spirituality was at the very heart of Arcturian existence. They did not separate religion from science or prayer from practice. Both were expressions of a single truth, that consciousness shaped reality. Meditation was not a solitary act, but a communal one. Entire cities would gather in vast crystalline amphitheaters, their voices harmonizing into chants that resonated across the planet, realigning its energy grids. These ceremonies were not symbolic. They had measurable effects. Storms would calm, crops would flourish, and the planet itself would hum in contentment. One of their most sacred practices was the alignment of the spheres. At specific celestial conjunctions, when Arcturus aligned with other star systems, the Arcturians would gather to open their collective awareness beyond their planet. They would send waves of frequency into the cosmos, subtle transmissions not of command, but of invitation, a call for peace, for connection, for cooperation. Many civilizations later recorded receiving these signals as bursts of inspiration, dreams of luminous beings, or sudden leaps in spiritual understanding. The Arcturian councils. Leadership in Arcturian society was fluid, never permanent. The High Council of Arcturus was composed of elders, not by age, but by resonance mastery. To be an elder was to have demonstrated the ability to align with truth, to silence ego, and to perceive the needs of the whole without personal distortion. Councils did not issue decrees, but facilitated harmonies, guiding decisions until all voices resonated in agreement. This approach baffled and frustrated the Draconians, whose hierarchical systems demanded strict obedience. To them, consensus was weakness. To the Arcturians, it was strength, for no decision could fracture unity when all had contributed to its making. Guardians of the Galactic Network. The galaxy was crisscrossed with star portals, ancient energy pathways linking systems across light years. Many civilizations knew of them, few understood them, and fewer still could control them. The Arcturians became the guardians of these networks. They mapped them, stabilized them, and taught only trusted civilizations how to use them without collapse. This role gave the Arcturians immense influence. They were not an empire, yet their stewardship of the star portals meant they were at the heart of galactic diplomacy. Civilizations sought their guidance, and even rivals respected their authority. To lose the Arcturians' trust was to risk being cut off from the pathways that connected the stars. The Arcturian fleet. Though reluctant warriors, the Arcturians maintained fleets, but their ships were unlike anything the Draconians had ever seen. Sleek, organic, their hulls glowed with crystalline veins that pulsed in rhythm with their pilots. Rather than command consoles, ships were guided by resonance chairs, crystalline thrones that merged with the pilot's consciousness. A skilled Arcturian could maneuver a vessel through dimensions, vanishing from one battlefield and reappearing in another before enemy sensors could react. Their weapons were designed to disable, not annihilate. Beams of harmonic energy could shut down Draconian systems, scramble aggressive neural patterns, or even induce sudden states of reflection in enemy troops. It was not uncommon for Draconian soldiers to abandon their posts after exposure, overwhelmed by emotions they had long suppressed. To the Draconians, this was infuriating. To the Arcturians, it was proof that true victory was not destruction, but transformation. Alliances and influence. The Arcturians were not alone. They forged alliances with the Pleiadians, the Andromedans, and other star nations that shared their vision of a galaxy rooted in cooperation rather than domination. These alliances were not militaristic, but cultural and spiritual. Exchanges of knowledge, mutual defense pacts, and joint stewardship of sensitive star systems. Their influence extended even to Earth. Ancient human civilizations, still in their infancy, recorded encounters with luminous beings who descended from the skies. In Sumerian tablets, Vedic hymns, and Native American legends, echoes of the Arcturians appear. Beings of light teaching the cycles of the stars, offering knowledge of healing, and guiding humanity toward harmony with the Earth. Though they never ruled, their fingerprints can still be found in the myths of gods who brought wisdom rather than conquest. The shadow of conflict. Yet, even as their light spread, the Arcturians were not naive. They knew that their way of life stood in direct opposition to darker forces rising in the galaxy. The Draconians, in particular, viewed them with contempt. To the Draconian warlords, the Arcturians' compassion was an insult. Their refusal to conquer a challenge to everything their empire represented. The more civilizations turned toward Arcturian guidance, the more threatened the Draconians became. And so, the seeds of war were planted, not because the Arcturians sought battle, but because they represented a living proof that another way was possible, and for the Draconians, that was intolerable. Thus, the Arcturians stood as beacons in a galaxy growing darker by the day. They were healers, builders, and stewards, yet when the call of war arrived, they would rise to defend not only their homeworld, but the freedom of countless others. They did not fight for domination, nor for expansion, they fought for balance. The Arcturians believed that true strength was not found in conquest, but in the ability to protect without enslaving, to guide without controlling, to heal without demanding tribute. It was this philosophy that made them revered by allies and hated by enemies. Origins of the Draconians. Every light has its shadow, and in the galactic stage, no shadow loomed darker than the Draconian Empire, the homeworld of scales and stone. Far across the galaxy, in a sector where stars burned harsh and planets bore unforgiving climates, the Draconians evolved. Their homeworld was no paradise, it was a crucible. Massive continents baked beneath relentless suns, while volcanic ranges poured rivers of molten fire across scarred landscapes. Storms raged across toxic seas, and survival demanded not harmony, but dominance. The beings who emerged from this environment were forged in conflict. Towering reptilian forms, scaled and muscular, the Draconians were predators by necessity. Their world did not reward cooperation, it rewarded strength, cunning, and ruthlessness. From the beginning, the Draconian species learned that only those willing to fight, to take, to dominate would survive. Where the Arcturians viewed their planet as a partner, the Draconians saw theirs as a rival to be conquered. They built vast subterranean cities beneath mountains of obsidian and iron, fortresses that shielded them from the storms above. Their architecture was functional, angular, intimidating, every structure designed to project power. The hierarchy of rule. The Draconian Empire was built on hierarchy. At its peak stood the warlords, colossal beings with wingspans stretching dozens of meters, their scales dark as night. These royal Draconians were said to be descendants of the first conquerors, their bloodlines preserved with brutal purity. Beneath them were the warrior castes, millions bred for battle, trained from birth to fight, obey, and conquer. Order was maintained through fear. A soldier who faltered was executed without hesitation. Families existed not for love, but for duty, producing offspring who would serve the empire. Loyalty was demanded, not earned. Even within their own ranks, betrayal was common. For in Draconian philosophy, to seize power through cunning or force was proof of worthiness. Their culture celebrated domination. Victory in battle was the highest honor. Weakness was the ultimate shame. Stories told to their young were not of gods who healed, but of warlords who crushed enemies beneath claw and flame. Where Arcturians meditated in harmony, Draconians drilled in combat pits, their roars echoing through stone chambers as they learned to kill without hesitation. Technology of conquest. The Draconians were not artists of light like the Arcturians. Their technology was brutal, efficient, and terrifying. Their ships were vast, angular leviathans, bristling with weapons that could reduce entire cities to ash. They integrated biological enhancements into their fleets, hulls layered with living tissue, engines infused with organic plasma sacs that pulsed like beating hearts. Ships were not merely machines. They were living extensions of the empire, bred to serve. Weapons were designed for one purpose: destruction. Massive plasma lances capable of piercing planetary shields. Gravity cannons that could crush vessels into debris fields. Viral bombs engineered to corrupt not only flesh, but the very biosphere of enemy worlds, twisting ecosystems into uninhabitable wastelands. The Draconians cared little for preservation. To them, conquest was not about balance, but about erasure. Their warriors, too, were enhanced. Gene forges bred soldiers for specific purposes, scouts with heightened senses, berserkers with immense strength, and psionic disruptors who could unravel enemy thought patterns with waves of fear. Entire generations were designed to serve campaigns, their individuality stripped away in favor of empire. The Draconian Creed. What drove them was a philosophy as old as their species. Strength defines truth. To the Draconians, morality was an illusion, a weakness conjured by fragile species too afraid to accept reality. Only the strong deserved to rule. Only the ruthless could protect order. Compassion was weakness, mercy, a disease. Their empire spread across countless systems under this creed. They enslaved weaker civilizations, conscripting their populations into mines, laboratories, and armies. Worlds that resisted were broken, their leaders executed publicly, their cultures erased. For the Draconians, assimilation was not enough. They sought domination so absolute that no rival could rise against them. And yet, they were not mindless beasts. They were strategic, calculating, and intelligent. Their warlords studied not just weapons, but psychology, learning how to bend enemies through fear long before a battle was fought. Their spies infiltrated enemy councils, sowing discord, weakening resolve. Their philosophy of conquest was as much mental as physical, the shadow influence on Earth. Like the Arcturians, the Draconians too reached Earth in ancient times, but their presence was far darker. Many human myths of dragons, serpents, and reptilian gods stemmed from these encounters. Where Arcturians inspired tales of beings of light, the Draconians seeded fear, demanding sacrifice, obedience, and worship. Civilizations that fell under their shadow were left with legends of monstrous rulers, beings who fed on fear and demanded absolute loyalty. It was here, on Earth, and countless other developing worlds, that their clash with the Arcturians grew most pronounced. The Arcturians sought to uplift, the Draconians to enslave. Humanity became one of many contested prizes in a far greater war. Strength in numbers. The Draconian Empire dwarfed many others in scale. Their breeding programs ensured endless waves of soldiers. Their industrial complexes churned out fleets at staggering rates. While the Arcturians perfected harmony, the Draconians perfected scale. Entire star systems were converted into war foundries, their populations enslaved to fuel the Empire's hunger. They were feared not only for their might, but for their relentlessness. Defeat meant little to a species that measured time in millennia. If a fleet was destroyed, another would rise. If a world was lost, 10 more would be conquered. The Draconians did not retreat. They regrouped, rebuilt, and returned with fury. The Warlords' Council. At the top of their hierarchy sat the Council of Warlords, a circle of the most powerful Draconian rulers. Each commanded fleets that stretched across hundreds of systems, yet none trusted the other. Their unity was forged not through brotherhood, but through necessity. They knew that only together could they crush their greatest threat, the Arcturians. The council chambers were vast caverns carved into black stone, illuminated by rivers of molten rock. Decisions were made not through consensus, but through intimidation. A warlord who showed weakness would be torn down, replaced by a rival eager for power. It was a brutal system, yet it ensured that only the most ruthless and cunning rose to the top. Fear of the light. For all their strength, the Draconians carried one fear, the light of higher consciousness. Though they mocked compassion, deep down they knew the power it held. Arcturian frequencies could disarm their soldiers, disrupt their aggression, and awaken emotions they had long buried. To a Draconian warrior, nothing was more dangerous than feeling, for feeling undermined obedience. Thus, they viewed the Arcturians not only as enemies, but as existential threats. It was not enough to defeat them militarily. They needed to prove, once and for all, that harmony was weakness, that light could be extinguished, that fear and domination were the only true laws of the universe. And so, the stage was set. On one side, the Arcturians, luminous beings of balance, harmony, and guardianship. On the other, the Draconians, reptilian conquerors forged in fire, masters of fear, and architects of domination. The galaxy held its breath as these two titans of philosophy and power began their inevitable clash. For this would not be a war of territory alone, but of ideals, a struggle to define the very soul of existence. If the Arcturians represented the best of what civilizations could become, the Draconians embodied the shadow of what they might descend into. First encounters and rising tensions. Wars of this magnitude rarely begin with declarations. They begin with whispers, shadows moving across the edges of perception, silent skirmishes in the outer systems. The galaxy is vast, yet even in its immensity, paths cross. The first confrontations between Arcturians and Draconians did not occur in the bright centers of power, but in quiet, overlooked corners of the cosmos. Systems where young civilizations were just taking root, where rich veins of energy pulsed beneath the surfaces of barren worlds. The Draconians saw these systems as ripe for conquest, the Arcturians as sanctuaries to be nurtured. Inevitably, their patrols began to meet. At first, these encounters were not battles, but standoffs. Arcturian crystalline vessels would arrive in orbit around a threatened world, radiating frequencies of protection. Draconian warships would respond with intimidation maneuvers, flanking formations, weapons primed but not fired. For years, these confrontations ended without violence, both sides withdrawing with bitter resentment. But tension built. The Draconians viewed every retreat as humiliation. The Arcturians saw every intimidation as proof of coming darkness. The line between defense and provocation grew thinner with each encounter. The Battle of Veon 4. The first true spark came at Veon 4, a barren planet rich in crystalline lattices, ideal for powering fleets. The Draconians moved first, deploying slave miners to strip the planet bare. When an Arcturian fleet arrived, they demanded the release of the enslaved workers and the preservation of the planet's natural energy grid. The Draconian commander laughed. To him, resources were meant to be consumed and slaves were tools. He ordered his fleet to hold position. The Arcturians, unwilling to watch life be stripped from the planet, activated their resonance fields, a protective dome that disabled the Draconian mining operations. For a moment, silence. Then came the first shot. A Draconian plasma lance tore through the protective dome, and in response, an Arcturian vessel emitted a harmonic pulse that disabled half the Draconian fleet systems. The battle raged for hours. Unlike the Draconians, who sought annihilation, the Arcturians fought with precision, disabling engines, scattering formations, forcing retreat. The Draconians left Veon 4 humiliated, their mining halted, their dominance challenged for the first time in generations. For them, this was intolerable. What should have been a minor skirmish became the spark of open war. War of influence. The conflict was not only fought with weapons, it was also fought in minds, myths, and influence. The Arcturians, with their luminous presence, had long been inspiring young civilizations to rise in peace. The Draconians, in contrast, seeded fear wherever they went. On countless worlds, both species became myth. To one culture, the Arcturians were star angels. To another, the Draconians were dragon gods. Earth became one of the most contested theaters in this silent war. Ancient humans recorded visions of serpents demanding tribute and beings of light offering knowledge. Neither side sought open conflict on Earth, but both understood its potential as a strategic hub and a genetic treasure. Humanity, unknowingly, became the pawn in a larger game, courted by light, manipulated by shadow. Espionage and subversion. Direct war was costly. Both sides turned to covert strategies. The Draconians infiltrated Arcturian-aligned civilizations, seeding corruption in their leadership. In some cases, entire planetary councils suddenly shifted allegiance, manipulated by fear or bribery. The Arcturians responded in kind, though with different methods. They deployed resonance operatives, individuals trained to raise consciousness within hostile populations. These operatives would not assassinate or sabotage, but inspire revolutions, awakening the enslaved to their power. Entire Draconian-controlled worlds fell into chaos as populations suddenly resisted, their chains no longer tolerated. For the Draconians, this was infuriating. They believed the Arcturians were poisoning the galaxy with dangerous ideas, freedom, compassion, self-determination. For the Arcturians, it was proof that the true battlefield was not fleets, but hearts. The fractured alliances. As tensions escalated, other star nations were drawn into the growing storm. The Pleiadians, closely allied with the Arcturians, offered fleets and intelligence. They too believed in nurturing young civilizations and stood firmly against the Draconian tide. The Zeta Reticulans, however, remained divided. Some saw the Draconians as too dangerous to resist and bent the knee, offering genetic services in exchange for protection. Others leaned toward Arcturian philosophy, believing the Draconians would eventually consume them if not stopped. The Orions fractured entirely. Some houses sided with the Draconians, seeing opportunity in conquest. Others turned to the Arcturians, desperate for guidance. The Orion Wars that followed would become a dark subplot of the larger conflict. It was in this web of alliances, betrayals, and subversions that the Great War began to take shape. The first Draconian counterstrike. The Draconians could not tolerate humiliation at Veon 4. Months later, they launched their first major counterstrike. The target, an Arcturian outpost at the edge of the Andromedan Corridor, a key portal that connected dozens of systems. The Draconian armada arrived in overwhelming force. Entire skies darkened as their warships descended. The Arcturian defenders fought valiantly, their resonance fields scattering enemy fire, their crystalline vessels weaving in and out of dimensional folds. But the numbers were against them. For every Draconian ship disabled, 2 more arrived. The outpost fell, its crystalline structures shattered, its defenders forced into retreat. For the first time in millennia, the Arcturians lost ground. The message was clear: the Draconians would not only challenge them, they would crush them. Ideologies collide. As the war escalated, the difference between the two civilizations became stark. The Arcturians fought to protect, to preserve, to inspire. They measured victory not in destruction, but in the number of lives saved, the number of worlds uplifted. The Draconians fought to dominate, to enslave, to erase. For them, every conquered system was a trophy, every enslaved species proof of superiority. The galaxy began to fracture along these lines. Some worlds chose the promise of protection under Arcturian light, others submitted to Draconian shadow, believing resistance futile. And in between lay countless civilizations caught in the crossfire, their fates determined not by their own strength, but by the tide of a war they never asked for. Thus, the first sparks became flame. Skirmishes turned to battles, battles to campaigns. The war had begun, not only for planets and resources, but for the very soul of the galaxy. It was no longer a question of if the Arcturians and Draconians would fight. The question became, how many worlds would burn before it ended? The Great War unfolds. The galaxy had seen wars before, but never like this. For this was not only a war of ships and soldiers, it was a war of ideals, fought across the stars, the mind, and the soul itself. Campaigns of fire and light. When the first true declarations were made, the galaxy trembled. The Council of Warlords vowed to extinguish the false light of Arcturus. In response, the High Council of Elders pledged to defend free worlds until their last breath. What followed were not isolated clashes, but sweeping campaigns across entire star corridors. The Draconian onslaught, fleets of thousands surged across border systems, overwhelming planetary defenses, enslaving populations in days. The Arcturian counterwaves, crystalline armadas appeared like phantoms, striking with precision, liberating colonies, then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. For the first time, the galaxy itself became a chessboard. Star portals, once quiet highways of trade, turned into blood-soaked choke points where battles raged for months. The Battle of the Orion Belt. No campaign defined the brutality of the war more than the Battle of the Orion Belt. Draconian warlords sought to secure Orion as a central base of operations, both for its resources and its symbolic value. The Arcturians, alongside Orion rebels and Pleiadian fleets, refused to surrender the region. The conflict lasted decades. Cities orbiting Rigel were reduced to debris fields. The twin stars of Mintaka became graveyards of shattered fleets. Entire Orion houses were erased, some siding with the Draconians and betrayed, others resisting to their last breath. It was during this campaign that the galaxy first witnessed the full terror of draconian bioweapons. Planets that resisted were seeded with viral plagues, engineered to break both body and spirit. Survivors became husks, their will stripped, their loyalty reprogrammed to the Empire. The Arcturians responded with their healers, deploying resonance sanctuaries across Orion. Songs of light filled the void, purging viral frequencies, restoring willpower. Some worlds survived, many did not. The Orion Belt became a scar that never fully healed. Psychic warfare. As fleets clashed, another war unfolded, silent, invisible, fought within the corridors of consciousness. The Draconians unleashed their psionic warlords, masters of fear projection. With a single thought, they could paralyze enemy squadrons, seeding hallucinations of defeat, turning allies against one another. Entire battles were won before the first shot was fired, enemy crews surrendering under waves of terror that crushed their minds. The Arcturians countered with resonance masters. These luminous warriors projected frequencies of calm, unity, and clarity. Where fear spread, they sowed courage. Where confusion reigned, they restored focus. In some battles, the clash of minds was so intense that space itself rippled with psychic shockwaves, visible even to untrained eyes as auroras dancing across the void. It was said that the greatest of these warriors could reach into the minds of enemies, not to destroy, but to awaken, turning draconian soldiers against their own warlords. For the Empire, this was the deepest humiliation, to be defeated not by weapons, but by the reawakening of feelings they had long suppressed. Betrayals in the shadows. The war fractured alliances. Fear and desperation drove many to betrayal. In Orion, entire houses switched sides mid-battle, selling their worlds for survival. Zeta factions betrayed Arcturian allies, offering genetic data to the Draconians in exchange for mercy. Even within the Arcturian alliance, some worlds, exhausted by endless conflict, began negotiating with the Empire in secret. The Draconians encouraged this treachery, rewarding defectors with temporary favor only to enslave them later. The Arcturians mourned each betrayal, not as a loss of power, but as proof of the fear poisoning the galaxy. Yet not all betrayals were one-sided. Draconian slaves, awakened by Arcturian resonance operatives, began turning against their masters. Entire legions revolted mid-campaign, seizing Draconian vessels and defecting to the Alliance. These acts of rebellion enraged the warlords, who responded with massacres, burning planets to ash as examples. The Pleiadian stand. In the midst of the chaos, the Pleiadians emerged as unlikely heroes. Though smaller in number, their fleets fought with unparalleled bravery. At the siege of Taygeta, Draconian armadas attempted to enslave the Pleiadian core worlds. Outnumbered 5-1, the Pleiadians held the line for months until Arcturian reinforcements arrived. Legends say that during the darkest moment of the siege, when defenses collapsed, an Arcturian resonance master projected a wave of light so powerful that it engulfed the system. Draconian ships froze, their crews overcome with visions of peace. For a brief moment, the war stopped. The Alliance regrouped, and Taygeta was saved. This event became myth across the stars, proof that even against overwhelming darkness, the light could still shine. The cost of resistance. But the war was not glorious. It was devastating. Entire systems were sterilized, their atmospheres stripped by draconian weapons. Star portals collapsed under strain, cutting off lifelines and isolating worlds. Refugees numbered in the billions, scattered across systems in desperate search of sanctuary. Even the Arcturians, with all their wisdom, could not prevent the suffering. They healed where they could, sheltered who they could, but the scale of devastation was beyond comprehension. For every liberated world, another fell. For every victory, a tragedy. Earth in the crossfire. Though not a major theater, Earth's role deepened during this period. Both sides intensified their influence. The Draconians seeded rulers with visions of power, demanding blood sacrifices in exchange for knowledge. Myths of serpent gods and fire-breathing dragons grew stronger. The Arcturians, meanwhile, inspired prophets, shamans, and mystics with visions of harmony. The myths of shining ones and sky gods of light echoed their influence. Humanity remained unaware of the larger galactic war, yet its collective psyche carried the imprints. Wars of angels and demons, gods and monsters, became allegories of the struggle raging above. The turning of quadrants. By the height of the war, entire galactic quadrants had been reshaped. The Orion belt was in ruins, a contested zone of endless battle. The Pleiades stood as a beacon of resistance, scarred but unbroken. Andromedan corridors were fractured, their star portals unstable. Draconian heartlands expanded, consuming dozens of neutral systems. The war was no longer a matter of border skirmishes. It was total. Every world, every species, every choice rippled into the conflict. The galaxy itself seemed to groan under the weight of destruction. Thus unfolded the Great War, not a single campaign, but an era of fire and shadow that spanned centuries. For the Arcturians, it was a war of survival, not of their bodies, but of their ideals. For the Draconians, it was a war of conquest, a test to prove their creed of domination. For the galaxy, it was an age of darkness, lit only by fleeting sparks of light in the endless night. Turning points. Every war reaches moments where destiny itself seems to hold its breath. In the Arcturian-Draconian conflict, these were the turning points, battles, choices, and awakenings that reshaped the path of history. The fall of Calith Prime. Calith Prime was a jewel of the galactic mid-rim, a hub of commerce, a sanctuary of art, and a neutral world that had, until then, managed to avoid choosing sides. Its leaders believed that by declaring neutrality, they could protect their people from war. But the Draconians saw neutrality as weakness. They descended on Calith Prime with an overwhelming fleet, enslaving millions overnight. The destruction was total. Crystal spires crumbled, libraries were burned, and billions of records of galactic history were lost in fire. The fall of Calith Prime shocked the galaxy. Worlds that had clung to neutrality suddenly realized that there was no safety in silence. They would either stand with the Arcturians or fall to the Draconians. Recruitment for the Arcturian alliance soared. Neutral worlds flocked to their banner, desperate to avoid the fate of Calith Prime. What the Draconians intended as a show of strength became, instead, a rallying cry for resistance. The betrayal at Vega. Not all was in the Arcturians' favor. At the star Vega, one of their most trusted allies betrayed them. The Vegans, longtime partners in resonance technology, secretly negotiated with the Draconians. Tired of endless conflict, they believed an alliance with the Empire would secure their survival. When an Arcturian fleet docked at Vega for resupply, Draconian warships ambushed them, guided by vegan navigational data. The massacre was devastating. Entire Arcturian squadrons were wiped out, their crystalline cores harvested for experimentation. The Draconians paraded the shattered vessels as trophies, declaring the end of Arcturian superiority. The betrayal wounded the Arcturians deeply, not just militarily, but spiritually. Trust, their greatest strength, had been turned into a weapon against them. Yet, even in this tragedy, the seeds of renewal were sown. Younger Arcturians vowed to never again underestimate the depths of Draconian deception. The awakening of the slave worlds. Perhaps the greatest shift, however, did not come from fleets or alliances, but from those the Draconians had enslaved. For centuries, entire populations had lived under chains, mining, building, and fighting for their reptilian overlords. But Arcturian resonance operatives had not been idle. They whispered hope into these populations, embedding frequencies into their dreams, reminding them of freedom. At first, revolts were small, a single mining colony refusing to work, a group of soldiers laying down their weapons. But soon, the resistance spread like wildfire. Whole planets erupted in rebellion, seizing draconian weapons and turning them on their masters. The Draconians responded with brutality, wiping out worlds in rage. But the rebellions continued. For every world silenced, 3 more rose. The Empire, once united by fear, now bled from within. The Arcturians, without firing a shot, had struck at the very heart of the Draconian creed, the belief that fear could keep civilizations in chains forever. The shattering of the Draco Gate. The most decisive military turning point came at the Draco Gate, a colossal star portal linking the Empire's heartland to the outer quadrants. For centuries, it had been the lifeline of draconian expansion, allowing fleets to surge outward in endless waves. The Arcturians devised a desperate plan. Rather than face the Armada directly, they would collapse the portal itself. A fleet of resonance masters and Pleiadian engineers infiltrated the gate, embedding harmonic disruptors into its crystalline frame. The battle that followed was apocalyptic. Draconian fleets swarmed to defend the gate, while Arcturian vessels phased in and out of dimensional folds, buying time for the disruptors to activate. When they did, the portal collapsed in a blinding flash that lit up entire systems. Half of the Draconian fleet was trapped on the wrong side of the galaxy, cut off from reinforcements. Supply lines shattered. For the first time, the Empire's expansion slowed. But the victory came at terrible cost. The Arcturian fleet tasked with the mission was almost entirely destroyed, their sacrifice echoing in memory for millennia. The turning of Earth. During this period, Earth too reached a quiet turning point. Humanity, still young, was pulled between shadow and light. The Draconians intensified their influence, posing as gods demanding blood and obedience. Human rulers, intoxicated by power, built empires on fear. But at the same time, Arcturian emissaries appeared in dreams and visions, inspiring prophets and teachers to speak of unity, compassion, and higher truths. Though humanity remained unaware of the larger war, its myths recorded the clash: angels against demons, dragons against shining beings, good against evil. Earth became a mirror of the greater galactic struggle. Though small in scale, these seeds would echo far into the future, for one day humanity would be called to choose its side. And so, the war shifted. Worlds once silent rose in rebellion. Portals once secure shattered. Allies betrayed, but others rallied stronger than ever. The Draconians still held immense power, their fleets vast, their cruelty unmatched. But for the first time, cracks appeared in their empire. Fear, once their greatest weapon, began to falter. The Arcturians, though battered and weary, saw a glimmer of hope. In the darkest of nights, even a single star can shift the course of history. These were the moments that reminded the galaxy. The Draconians could be resisted, and perhaps they could even be defeated. Resolution and aftermath. Wars of such scale rarely end in triumph or total defeat. They end in exhaustion, in uneasy truces, in shadows that linger long after the fire burns out. The final campaigns. With the collapse of the Draco Gate, the Empire's momentum faltered. Slave revolts spread faster than the warlords could crush them. Entire fleets were stranded in hostile sectors, yet the Draconians did not yield. They unleashed their fury in one last series of campaigns, striking at Pleiadian strongholds, Andromedan corridors, and even attempting a direct assault on Arcturus itself. The siege of Arcturus remains one of the most desperate battles in galactic history. The skies above the Golden Star blazed as draconian armadas descended, their plasma fire darkening the heavens. But the Arcturians, united as never before, unleashed every resonance weapon, every frequency mastery, every alliance they had forged. The Pleiadians fought at their side. Rebel Orion surged in with vengeance. Even defected draconian legions joined the defense. The battle raged for weeks. Space itself rippled under the psychic shockwaves. At last, the Empire withdrew, bleeding, unable to breach the radiant defenses of Arcturus. For the first time, the Arcturians had not only survived, they had held their home. The Treaty of Shadows. The war could not continue indefinitely. Both sides were fractured, exhausted. The Arcturians had lost countless fleets. Their healers and resonance masters stretched beyond limits. The Draconians still possessed terrifying power, but their empire was crumbling under internal revolts. Thus came what historians call the Treaty of Shadows. It was not a public signing, not a grand peace. It was a secret understanding. The Draconians would halt their campaigns of expansion, consolidating their empire. The Arcturians would cease direct interference in Draconian-held worlds, focusing instead on strengthening alliances and rebuilding. Both sides would continue their conflict, but in silence, through covert operations, influence, and shadow wars. The galaxy exhaled. The age of open destruction ended, but peace never truly came. Aftermath across the stars. The war left scars that would never fade. The Orion belt was reduced to a wasteland, its once proud civilizations fractured, many erased. The Pleiades emerged scarred but united, forever bound in loyalty to the Arcturians. The Draconian Empire survived but weakened, its aura of invincibility shattered by rebellion and defeat. The Arcturians endured, but their golden age dimmed, their society forever marked by the cost of war. Refugees wandered across star systems, entire species disappeared into extinction, star portals collapsed, isolating worlds for millennia, and myths, carried through survivors, became the seeds of new legends. Earth's legacy. On Earth, the war's end manifested not as fleets in the skies, but as stories. Myths of fallen angels, dragon wars, cosmic battles between light and darkness, all were echoes of the galactic struggle. Humanity, though unaware, carried the war in its subconscious. The Arcturians, bound by the treaty, withdrew to the shadows, watching, guiding quietly through dreams and inspiration. The Draconians, though weakened, maintained influence, whispering to rulers, feeding cycles of fear and domination. Earth remained contested, a silent prize in a war that had never truly ended. Lessons of the war. For the Arcturians, the greatest lesson was humility. They had believed that light alone could shield the galaxy, but they learned that vigilance was necessary, that compassion must sometimes be defended with strength. For the Draconians, the lesson was bitter. Fear could control, but not forever. The spark of rebellion once lit was almost impossible to extinguish. They could dominate bodies, but never truly kill the spirit. And for the galaxy, the lesson was clear. Light and shadow would always dance. Neither side had triumphed, and perhaps neither ever could. What mattered was balance, the eternal tension between freedom and control, compassion and power. Thus ended the Arcturian-Draconian War, not in victory, not in peace, but in uneasy silence. The fires dimmed, but the embers remained, glowing in myths, in shadows, in the subconscious of countless worlds. Some say the war still continues, hidden, unseen, that every struggle of light and darkness in the galaxy, even on Earth, is but another chapter in the oldest conflict of all. Conclusion: the eternal echo, the war that shaped the galactic soul. The Arcturian-Draconian War stands not as a mere historical event confined to the annals of cosmic history, but as a foundational mythos for the galaxy itself. A timeless narrative that encapsulates the eternal struggle between two opposing principles of existence. It was a conflict that transcended the physical annihilation of fleets and the conquest of territories. It was a war for the soul of the cosmos, a millennia-long argument over the fundamental nature of power, consciousness, and community. Its resolution did not bring a final victory, but rather an uneasy, dynamic equilibrium, a cold war of ideologies that continues to resonate in the subconscious of every sentient species, including our own. At its heart, the war was a clash of cosmic philosophies made manifest. The Arcturians represented the principle of synthesis, the belief that true strength emerges from harmony, that technology should be an extension of consciousness, and that the purpose of an advanced civilization is to nurture, steward, and elevate. Their crystalline cities and resonance-based technology were not just tools, but expressions of a worldview where the individual and the collective, the spiritual and the material, are integrated into a cohesive whole. In contrast, the Draconians embodied the principle of dominance, the conviction that the universe is a brutal arena where strength is the only valid currency. that order must be imposed through fear, and that evolution is a linear path toward absolute control. Their angular warships and biogenetic legions were the ultimate expression of a philosophy that sees life as a hierarchy to be climbed and conquered. The aftermath of this colossal struggle reveals a profound and humbling truth. Absolute victory is often an illusion in conflicts of such scale. The Treaty of Shadows did not herald the triumph of light over darkness, but the acknowledgement of a necessary, if tense, coexistence. The Draconian Empire, though checked and humbled, was not destroyed. Its core philosophy of domination persists, its influence merely driven underground, manifesting in the subtle manipulations of power, the covert engineering of conflict, and the exploitation of fear. The Arcturians, though they preserved their home and their ideals, were forever changed. They learned that boundless compassion, without the will to defend it, is a vulnerability. Their golden age of pure, unadulterated light was tempered by the hard-won wisdom that guardianship sometimes requires a shield as well as an open hand. This unresolved tension is the war's most enduring legacy. It transformed the galaxy from a collection of isolated star systems into an interconnected, yet fractured, political and spiritual landscape. The ruins of the Orion Belt serve as a permanent memorial to the cost of war, a warning etched in stardust. The fortified unity of the Pleiades stands as a testament to the bonds forged in shared resistance. The entire cosmos was seeded with the archetypes of this conflict: the benevolent, luminous guide and the fearsome reptilian overlord. These are not random figures of myth. They are psychic echoes, fragments of a collective galactic memory imprinted on the DNA of developing worlds. On Earth, we know these archetypes intimately. They are the angels and demons of our religions, the wise kings and tyrannical dragons of our folklore, the enduring struggle between our highest aspirations for unity and our basest instincts for control. For humanity, this narrative holds a mirror to our own trajectory. We are a young species, poised at a precipice not unlike the one that once faced the galaxy. Our technological power is accelerating at a dizzying rate, outpacing our spiritual and ethical maturity. The Arcturian-Draconian War presents us with a choice, allegorized on a cosmic scale. Will we use our growing power to build, to heal, and to connect in the spirit of the Arcturians? Or will we succumb to the draconian impulse, creating hierarchies of exploitation, dominating our planet, and turning our technology into instruments of control and fear? The silent, ongoing conflict between these forces is not just happening out there. It is happening within the collective human psyche. Every act of compassion, every stand for justice, every effort toward global cooperation is a resonance in favor of the Arcturian ideal. Every act of tyranny, every stoking of division, every exploitation of the vulnerable is a victory for the Draconian shadow. Ultimately, the story of the Arcturian-Draconian War is a call to conscious evolution. It teaches that the most important battles are not won with weapons, but with consciousness. The Draconians were ultimately thwarted not by superior firepower, but by the awakened spirit of the very beings they sought to enslave, a testament to the indomitable nature of free will. The Arcturians prevailed not by obliterating their enemy, but by holding fast to their core identity while adapting to the harsh realities of conflict. The war did not end because one side was annihilated, but because a balance was struck, a recognition that both light and shadow are intrinsic parts of a whole universe. The silence that now hangs between the stars is not an empty one. It is a silence filled with memory, with lessons, and with potential. The Arcturians continue their watch, their guidance now more subtle, their methods wiser for the scars they carry. The Draconians bide their time, their ambition undimmed, their methods refined by defeat. And in the middle, species like ours awaken, gifted with the echoes of this ancient struggle. We are the new variable in this eternal equation. The choices we make, to build bridges or walls, to nurture or to dominate, to seek harmony or control, will determine not only our own fate, but will also add our reverse to the ongoing galactic scale story of what it means to be a conscious civilization in a universe of limitless possibility. The war is over, but the story is forever. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I love hearing from you. Check out more videos on the screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.